So Pastor Dag Mills fires a pastor because the pastor during a message, I guess, maybe he was laughing. I don't know what might have triggered him to fire this particular pastor. But I'm going to play the video and then I'll come back with my commentary. I want to put a couple of scenarios for why I don't think this would be necessary, or think there's a lot of factors that really go into it, but I'll highlight those just in a minute. I'll just fire the points out as we go. Mr. Heward-Mills show the daily Christian commentary videos, and on this channel we like for people or Christians to believe or think about biblical topics or Christian topics from a biblical mindset. Let's take this video on and I'll be back in a sec.
What's your name? Huh?
Eric Asalabi.
Eric what? Give me a microphone. Are you a pastor? What are you? Huh?
I'm a pastor.
A pastor.
Yes, please.
What message have you been listening to?
Attempt to do great things for the Lord.
Attempt to do great things for the Lord. What's that?
Attempt to do great things for the Lord.
Attempt to do great things. What message is that?
You've written a book called,
I've written a book.
called Attempt to do great things for the Lord.
This is a pastor. This is a pastor. It's a disgrace. You call this a pastor? It's a disgrace. You are not a pastor anymore. You are not a pastor. This is a representative of the church. This is a representative of the church. It's a representative of our church. When I take 3 people here and I start to ask you certain questions, you will see that you are not a pastor in this church. The basics of listening to messages. The basics.
Now, point number 1, I think there is a lot of things to consider, because he fires the pastor because the pastor doesn't remember what the message was about or what the points that he mentioned are about. But there's a lot of factors that go into that a person might not think about. Now, as a person who did a lot of media stuff in church, and as a person who was the daily Bible and notebook guy, I can tell you that sometimes teach it. The things that are most important and crucial, people will remember. That's the thing to note here. And a lot of times people, they don't realize how much they have retained or how much. That's why you'll just recall something and say, I remember someone saying something like this, but they might not even remember who exactly. That's the first thing to note, is that people will remember the most important and crucial things. Number 2 is this. People are very busy in church, okay? That man might have a wife, his wife, maybe the child is crying or something. It just gets very busy being in church because you're trying to make sure that your child is quiet or whatnot. But even not that, if this man is a pastor, sometimes pastors get flooded with requests. Pastor, can this happen? Pastor, is this the day that this is going to happen? If he's a junior pastor, that makes it even worse because he might be part of this particular community, part of this committee, part of that committee. And as at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that man is flooded with the requests during the day, from morning up until the service, that he doesn't have time. At that moment, it's not clicking. That's why sometimes pastors who are junior pastors in a church, they might even attend 1 or 2 services if the church does have that, because sometimes they just get so flooded that they might not even remember the message. Now, it's not a bad thing that a person doesn't remember a message, okay? It's not. Some people were like that even from childhood. They got taught something right now, they won't remember it immediately. The worst thing that for me was how Pastor Dag Mills, now from how we've known him over the years, like his harsh personality and all that kind of jazz, from how we've known him, for him to have tackled it this way, the way he just fires him for not remembering, that just doesn't sound thingy. But also, another thing to remember here, some people are not used to confrontation. So basically, the moment they get confronted, they freeze. Okay? They completely freeze. Like, they don't know what to do. They just get stuck up. Like you watch those horror movies and then you see people scream and they stand. Normally we don't stand and scream. Normally we just freeze, okay? And I think the silence of the pastor is not that he doesn't know what the message was or he doesn't remember the points. As I'm stating here, given time to recollect his thoughts, he might actually be able to fire off those thoughts and whatever the points were that were mentioned in the message. But because he's confronted about it, now his whole shtick of being a pastor, it's put before everybody. And the question is, were you listening, buddy? You know? And so that alone can strike fear to a person who's not used to confrontation. That's why I've constantly said, if you're a pastor, you're a person in thingy, one thing that a person must learn, number one, is how to interact. If anything comes up, how quick can you fire it off? How can you get into an interview, they ask you a question you were not prepared for and be on point with your answer? But that happens when you get used to answering. I remember, for me personally, I saw it when I went for a live event. And in this event, they were just asking questions here. And I realized that it took me very long. And I remember sending that to the coordinator of the event. And I said, I hated watching myself back because I couldn't stand how I took forever answering questions. And from that point, I started working at, it's not that I didn't have the answers, I did. But the problem was I didn't train myself to think that fast. This is something that happens, okay? It's a thing that happens. Like, I mean, like when people did debates in school and stuff like that, that stuff was meant to train us. Now, don't mind me holding this phone. It's just in case if the audio here fails or the audio that I'm recording here fails. I'm tired of recording and the audio's okay? I'm still testing out this new system of recording on the yellow box and stuff like that. All right. And so that's another thing that can make the pastor to forget. It's not that the pastor is not a diligent pastor. It's just something he's not used to confrontation. And I bet you right now, 98% of pastors are not used to confrontation, but they don't have to deal with confrontation. You know, they don't have to ever get into. That's why pastors just always rely on, you know, call your neighbor, invite your neighbor to church. You know, that whole, because the pastor himself doesn't know how to interact. He doesn't know how to communicate the message of the gospel. Okay? I remember not long ago, I think about last year, I once mentioned it on a live stream. This other pastor who wanted the church to pay him, and the pastor could not grow a church past 15 people. And those 15 people were there because of the family members, calling family members and whatnot, and stuff like that. And so that's another thing. Some people are not used to confrontation. It doesn't mean they are not a pastor. It means they have to train themselves as a pastor. Some people think they are old enough. Like I've met a lot of people who watch this channel who don't like me, like who are just not, you know, they're not friendly. But when they meet me, they have so many issues that they have with me that they can't even think of one. Like, no, Ricky, you are wrong. Like, where? Just try and remember the latest video or something, you know. But because they just meet me in a heat of the moment, but they're not used to confrontation, so they don't know how to take on that conversation, that it becomes a fruitful conversation from there. So for me, not necessary that a person should be fired for not remembering the point. And also, another point, which might not be the nicest thing to say, he's a pastor. And being a pastor, he might be going through the points of why this message is not making sense and why, and also quoting to himself and thinking back the things that are being said. And in the process of doing that, he got taken over by a certain thought and he starts thinking about that because it's along the lines of what was being taught. And it might take him a while to get to that point. And he's like, you know what? Yeah. While he's still validating, you know, have you never caught yourself doing that? You're a good listener, yes, but then you are more of a recollection listener. Like, oh, you hear something, oh yeah, it registers, it reminds me of, oh yeah, it registers. So personally, when I listen, I do that a lot. And I do that because it helps me remember the points. You get me? I do that because it helps me remember the things that are being mentioned. But in this case, the man was fired because he couldn't remember the points that are in the message. And the man was criticizing. It's like, hey, it's not sounding. This is not sounding. and the pastor saw him, and it kind of gave him away, and the pastor came and he felt the need to fire him. I don't think this is something to get fired over. Maybe being disloyal in the space of doctrine. Okay, the man is not loyal to the doctrine of the gospel. The man is not dedicated to study, that he would bring up things that are solid teaching. Fired for that, okay, maybe then we can discuss it. People do mature even in preaching as well. And so, but to get fired for not remembering what the pastor was saying, that's ridiculous for me. Yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. But like I stated, Dag does not have the best record of being patient or thingy. Okay, I've seen him say some of the craziest things out there, like some of the wildest things. But the things that he would say is because he's not a patient person. And we've seen that with people that have been dismissed from his ministry and whatnot and all these things. But y'all tell me what you think. For me personally, it's not something to get fired over. When a person is in church, there is a lot that's happening. The problem is that pastors become the center of the church. They forget the community of the church. The pastor might be interacting with this one, helping is your work as a pastor and stuff like that. Especially the junior pastors, they get flooded with a lot of stuff. Okay? And so I remember being in one church, and the junior of that pastor was responsible for going to fetch people. He had to remember where people stay. He had to remember to call this one so that the mother would let you. It was a lot, especially when they did the youth services in that church. The pastor had to do all of that, and then he must come do the announcements, do this. And so at the end of the day, the pastor has a lot going on. But in a church where the pastor is a superstar, you must remember what he says. But you must remove yourself. As a pastor, remove yourself from the thing. For me, not something to get fired over. But y'all tell me what you think. It's Ricky. Other episodes down in the comments. Y'all have a good one.